People who have experienced a traumatic event but did not subsequently develop post traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, tend to produce higher levels of the hormone cortisol than when exposed to stress than do people who have not experienced traumatic stress.
Okay, so what does that mean so far?
People who have experienced traumatic events but then didn't get PTSD still produce or tend to produce higher levels of cortisol when they are exposed to stress again than
Okay.
people who have not experienced a traumatic event.
Perfect.
This suggests that experiencing a traumatic event can affect how much cortisol one produces in response to stress.
What is the flaw here?
Um, it's a correlation
Yes, why?
because they're saying that if you have a traumatic event, well, so if they have this example of someone who experienced a traumatic event but didn't get PTSD, still produces high levels of cortisol when they are experienced or when their stress is introduced. And now they're saying that anyone who experienced a trauma or
They
anyone who experienced a traumatic event.
Yeah, so they think that the traumatic effect is what causes, or they're thinking the traumatic event affects how much cortisol, right?
Mhm.
In reality, what could be the case?
um, the cortisol is what increases the no, sorry. Or
You're on the right track with the cortisol.
like the cortisol impacts the level of like stress one experiences
Kind
and
of like maybe
process.
those that naturally have high cortisol,
Mm-hmm.
maybe they're like some people just naturally have high cortisol, and those people are less likely to get PTSD,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like it doesn't have to be the traumatic event that causes it. Like, couldn't the cortisol have already been there?
Mm-hmm.
Right. So, so now we're going to go back and we're going to think about how we can weaken this. So experiencing a traumatic event affects the cortisol. So if I was going to weaken this, what could we say?
um that like it was the amount of cortisol and like no traumatic event to someone with just like a naturally.
Yes, that this was already there. That some people just naturally, like some people just already naturally have high cortisol.
Mm-hmm.
Excellent. All right, go ahead and start with A.
A medical condition sometimes affect how much cortisol people who have how much cortisol people who have not experienced a traumatic event produce in response to stress. Um, I feel like that was going along with what we said. That was the one I chose. Um,
So I don't like that it has some time. So at least one time.
mm-hmm,
So that's twice that you fell for a sum.
mm-hmm,
Sorry, some of my things. The other thing is, like, just because this other thing can also affect how much cortisol you have, does that mean that a traumatic event doesn't also?
no.
No, and because this is saying like those who have, and this is also saying not experience a traumatic event. Like this would be different if like every person that we were talking about in this traumatic event had a medical condition that had already caused it. But we're
Mm-hmm.
talking about those that have not experienced, so that's irrelevant. All right, what about B?
Producing more cortisol than average in response to stress helps prevent a person from developing PTSD as a result of experiencing a traumatic event. Producing more cortisol. Yeah, so well, okay, so in this they're saying that if you like naturally produce more cortisol, you have a better chance of not developing PTSD when exposed to a traumatic event. But isn't that what?
I don't love this one because I feel like this is saying that like this is like in response to stress
Mm-hmm.
helps prevent PTSD. Producing more cortisol than average in response to stress helps prevent a person from developing PTSD as a result of experiencing. Like I still feel like the traumatic event here is causing the cortisol.
Yeah.
I would leave this one open. I don't love it. I don't like it at all, but I don't feel comfortable crossing it off because I'm like, what if I'm missing something?
Okay. C, experiencing a traumatic event would produce more cortisol than they would under less severe instances of stress. Um, wait, did I just read that? People experiencing a
So they're saying pretty much the same thing. So that makes me not like B even more.
okay, a traumatic event would produce more cortisol.
Because that's strengthening the idea that traumatic affects the cortisol produced.
Mhm.
I don't like C.
D, many effective treatments for PTSD are designed to reduce how much cortisol those with PTSD produce when exposed to stress. I don't like that one.
That strengthens the idea that it affects how much cortisol you produce too. I really hope E's the answer because I don't like anything.
E, experiencing a traumatic event can damage the gland that produces cortisol, resulting in that gland producing more cortisol. I'll cross that out also. The answer is B.
Hey, look at Elise.
You left that open. Um,
Okay, but let's figure out why. So producing more cortisol than average in response to stress helps prevent a person from developing PTSD as a result of experiencing. Oh, okay. So I kind of like misread this fast part, but it's saying like helps prevent a person from developing PTSD as a result of experiencing a traumatic event. This is like all one subject. I was reading it as like response to stress, like the traumatic event already happened.
okay.
This is just saying like naturally people.
People with more cortisone are less triggered
Yes,
by.
yes. As like when it if it were to happen. So like
Okay.
the orange part like hasn't happened yet.
Okay.
So B is what we predicted.
Okay.
It
That
produces
makes sense
more
when
cortisol
we
than
explain
average
it.
in response to stress. Helps prevent a person from developing PTSD. So like you already were producing more cortisol than average.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. That's kind of what we were saying.
Yes, I just misread that. I was thinking that like the response to stress was the traumatic event.
That's
No.
okay.
Look at you.